The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Meridian Tech's headquarters, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Natalie Brooks pushed through the revolving doors at precisely 7:45, her worn leather bag slung over her shoulder and a thermos of homemade coffee clutched in her hand. She couldn't afford the artisan coffee from the lobby cafe, not on her assistant's salary, but she'd learned to make her own morning ritual matter in small ways. The elevator hummed as it carried her to the 32nd floor, where the executive suites occupied a world that felt galaxies away from the cubicle farms below. Natalie had worked at Meridian Tech for 5 years, serving as the executive assistant to Julian Pierce, the company's youngest CEO in its 40-year history. At 36, Julian had transformed a struggling software company into a tech powerhouse, his vision and ruthless efficiency earning him respect, fear, and a fortune that Natalie could barely comprehend. She settled at her desk outside his corner office, a workspace that had become more familiar to her than her own apartment. The surface was immaculate, organized with the precision of someone who knew that chaos in her world meant disaster in his. Before Julian arrived, she had already reviewed his calendar, prepared briefing documents for his 9 o'clock meeting, confirmed his lunch reservation at that impossible-to-book restaurant downtown, and drafted responses to emails that had arrived overnight from their Tokyo office. Julian arrived at 8:30, striding past her desk with his phone pressed to his ear, his other hand gesturing emphatically at points only he could see. He was handsome in that particular way of driven men, all sharp angles and focused intensity. His tailored suits probably cost more than Natalie's monthly rent, and his watch, a vintage piece he'd inherited from his grandfather, was worth more than her car. He didn't say good morning. He never did. The door to his office clicked shut, and Natalie released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. This was normal. This was every day. She was the machinery that kept his world turning, invisible but essential, like the gears inside an expensive watch. By mid-morning, the office buzzed with its usual frenetic energy. Project managers rushed between meetings, software engineers debated code in the break room, and the sales team celebrated closing a major deal with a vendor who'd brought pastries. Natalie moved through it all like a ghost, speaking when spoken to, which wasn't often. She'd become so good at being invisible that people sometimes startled when they realized she was in the room. She was organizing files when her phone buzzed with an internal message from Human Resources. They were sending up the new marketing director for introductions. Natalie glanced at Julian's calendar and made a note to interrupt his call at 11:15 to give him a 5-minute warning before the meeting. Marcus Hartley arrived at exactly 11 o'clock. 15 minutes early, which Natalie appreciated. Punctuality was rare in the executive ranks, where making others wait had become a power play. He was tall and lean, with sandy hair that looked professionally styled but somehow still casual, and eyes that were a warm amber color that seemed to actually see her when they met hers. "You must be Natalie Brooks," he said, extending his hand. His smile reached those amber eyes, creating small crinkles at the corners that suggested he smiled often. "I've heard your name at least a dozen times this morning. Apparently, if anyone wants anything done around here, you're the person who makes it happen." Natalie shook his hand, surprised by the warmth of his grip and the directness of his gaze. "I just keep the calendar organized, Mr. Hartley. Marcus, please. And I suspect you do considerably more than manage a calendar." He glanced around the executive suite with an appraising eye. "I've worked in tech for 15 years, and I've learned that the real power in any company sits right where you're sitting. The assistants know everything, fix everything, and rarely get credit for anything." Heat rose to Natalie's cheeks. She wasn't used to being acknowledged, let alone praised. "That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness. It's observation." Marcus settled into one of the chairs opposite her desk, making no move to pull out his phone or check his messages. "I'm going to be relying on you quite a bit as I get up to speed. I hope that's all right?" "Of course. That's what I'm here for." "No," Marcus said gently. "What you're here for is to support Julian. Helping me would be going above and beyond, which means I'll owe you. How about this? You help me navigate the politics and personalities around here, and I'll make sure your contributions don't go unnoticed anymore." Before Natalie could respond, Julian's door opened. He stood in the doorway, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp as they moved from Marcus to Natalie and back again. "Hartley." "You're early. Habit of mine." Marcus stood smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket. "I was just getting acquainted with your assistant. She's already been incredibly helpful." Something flickered across Julian's face, too quick to read. Yes, Natalie is efficient. The word hung in the air like an epithet. Efficient. Not talented, not valuable, not indispensable. Efficient. Like a well-oiled machine or a properly filed document. Marcus's eyes flicked to Natalie, and she saw understanding in them, perhaps even sympathy. "I'd say she's considerably more than that, but we should probably start our meeting." As the two men disappeared into Julian's office, Natalie sat very still, Marcus's words echoing in her mind. For 5 years, she had accepted being invisible. She had told herself that her work spoke for itself, that recognition didn't matter, that she was professional enough not to need validation. But Marcus had offered her something she didn't realize she'd been starving for: to be seen. The afternoon passed in its usual blur of tasks and problem-solving. Natalie rescheduled a meeting that conflicted with a board member's vacation, tracked down a contract that someone had misfiled, and coordinated with IT to resolve a system access issue for Julian's upcoming presentation. Each task was completed with the quiet competence that had become her trademark. At 4 o'clock, Marcus emerged from a series of meetings and stopped at her desk. "Natalie, do you have a moment?" She looked up from her computer, where she'd been reviewing quarterly reports. "Of course. What can I help you with?" "I wanted to thank you properly for your help today." He placed a small paper bag on her desk. "I noticed you bring your own coffee in the morning, so I took a guess that you might appreciate good beans to brew at home." "There's a roaster near my apartment that does incredible work." Natalie stared at the bag as if it might bite her. "Mr. Hartley, you really didn't need to—" "Marcus, and I wanted to." His smile was easy, genuine. "Consider it a welcome gift for making me feel welcome." From inside his office, Julian looked up from his desk. Through the glass walls that surrounded the executive suite, he watched the exchange with an expression that Natalie, had she been looking, might have recognized as surprise. He watched Marcus make her smile, a real smile that transformed her usually serious face into something luminous. Julian found himself standing without quite meaning to, drawn toward his door by an impulse he didn't understand. But by the time he opened it, Marcus was walking away, and Natalie was looking at the coffee with an expression of pure delight that Julian had never seen directed at anything in his office. "Natalie," he called, his voice sharper than intended. She looked up quickly, the smile fading. "Yes, Mr. Pierce?" He had no idea what he'd meant to say. "The Patterson report. Is it ready? I sent it to you 2 hours ago. It's in your inbox, flagged as priority." Of course it was. It always was. She never missed deadlines, never forgot details, never failed to anticipate his needs. For 5 years, she had been perfect in her role. "Right," he said. "Thank you." He retreated to his office and closed the door, but found himself unable to focus on the report she'd prepared. Instead, his eyes kept drifting to her desk, to the small paper bag sitting beside her computer, to the way she occasionally glanced at it with a soft expression he'd never noticed before. Something uncomfortable twisted in Julian's chest, a feeling he couldn't name because he'd spent so long training himself not to feel anything at work. Emotions were inefficient. Emotions complicated things. Emotions made you vulnerable. But as the afternoon shadows lengthened and he watched Natalie pack up her things for the day, carefully placing the coffee in her bag like it was precious, Julian realized that something had shifted. A stranger had walked into his office and in one afternoon had accomplished something Julian hadn't in 5 years. Marcus Hartley had made Natalie Brooks feel visible, and Julian, for the first time since he'd hired her, wondered what else he'd failed to see. The following Monday arrived with an unseasonable warmth that seemed to promise change. Natalie found herself humming as she prepared for work, a lightness in her chest that felt foreign and wonderful. The coffee Marcus had given her was as extraordinary as he'd promised, rich and complex, and she'd savored every morning cup over the weekend while reading on her small balcony. She arrived at the office to find a sticky note on her computer monitor. "Morning, Natalie. Thanks again for your help last week. If you're free for lunch today, I'd love to pick your brain about the Morrison account." Such a small thing, she thought. Yet it made her feel valued in a way that 5 years of performance reviews never had. Those reviews always praised her efficiency, her reliability, her attention to detail. But Marcus treated her like a colleague, someone whose insights mattered. Julian arrived 20 minutes later, his expression stormy. He'd spent the weekend trying to focus on the quarterly projections, but his mind kept wandering to Marcus Hartley's easy smile and the way Natalie had looked at that bag of coffee. It was absurd. He ran a multi-billion-dollar company. He couldn't afford to be distracted by office dynamics. "Natalie, I need the Singapore contracts by 10, he said without preamble. She looked up from her screen. "They're already in your inbox. I sent them Friday afternoon before I left. Then I need you to call their legal team and confirm the clauses we discussed." "I did that Friday as well. They've agreed to all our terms except the intellectual property clause, which they want to discuss on tomorrow's call. I've already scheduled it for 8 a.m. our time, which is 9 p.m. theirs. I sent you the updated agenda yesterday evening." Julian stood there, searching for something else to request, something to justify the sharp tone he'd used. But she'd anticipated everything, as always. Fine. Good. He retreated to his office, and Natalie returned to her work, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something about Julian was different today. His usual cool detachment had an edge to it, a tension that hadn't been there before. At noon, Marcus appeared at her desk with 2 takeout bags from the Thai restaurant 3 blocks away. "I took a chance that you hadn't ordered lunch yet. I hope you like curry." Natalie glanced at Julian's closed door. "I usually eat at my desk. Then it's time to change that habit." Marcus's smile was warm and insistent. "There's a nice courtyard on the 5th floor that nobody uses. Come on, 20 minutes of fresh air won't bring the company crashing down." She hesitated, then saved her document and stood. 20 minutes. From his office, Julian watched them leave together through the glass walls. His jaw tightened. He told himself he was annoyed about the disruption to workflow, about having his assistant unavailable during business hours. He told himself it had nothing to do with the way Natalie laughed at something Marcus said as they waited for the elevator. He told himself a lot of things that weren't quite true. The courtyard was a hidden gem, a small garden space with benches and flowering trees that Natalie had never known existed. They sat in dappled sunlight, and Marcus unpacked containers of pad thai and green curry with the ease of someone comfortable in his own skin. "So," he said, handing her utensils, "tell me about the Morrison account. I've read the files, but files don't tell you what really happened." For the next 20 minutes, Natalie found herself talking about strategies and client relationships, about the delicate negotiations that had salvaged a deal everyone else had written off. Marcus listened intently, asking smart questions, building on her ideas rather than dismissing them. "You're wasted as an assistant," he said finally. "You should be in strategy or client relations." Natalie shook her head. "I don't have an MBA. I don't have the right background. You have something better: institutional knowledge and genuine insight. Half the MBAs upstairs can recite theory but can't read a room or understand what a client actually needs." He paused. "Has Julian ever suggested you apply for other positions here?" "No, I don't think he sees me that way." "Then he's not looking." Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. "I've been here 1 week, and I can already see you're the linchpin of that entire floor. When people have problems, they come to you, not to their managers. When something needs fixing, you fix it. That's not assistant work, Natalie. That's leadership." She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back quickly. "I should get back." "Of course." He stood and gathered their trash. "But think about what I said. And Natalie, thank you for lunch. Your company was the best part. When she returned to her desk, she found Julian standing there, his expression unreadable. Where were you? Lunch, in the fifth-floor courtyard. I needed you. Natalie pulled up her phone log. You didn't call my cell. Is something wrong? He opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth was, nothing had been wrong. He'd simply noticed her absence like a missing tooth, a gap where something should be. No, it's fine. But it wasn't fine. For the rest of the afternoon, Julian found himself acutely aware of every interaction between Marcus and Natalie. When Marcus stopped by her desk to share a joke, Julian's fingers stilled on his keyboard. When Natalie's laugh rang out, clear and unguarded, something in his chest constricted. He'd built his entire career on focus and discipline. Yet now, he couldn't concentrate for more than 10 minutes without his attention drifting to the woman outside his office, the one he'd never really noticed until someone else had pointed out everything he'd been missing. That evening, as the office emptied, Julian made an impulsive decision. He emerged from his office and cleared his throat. Natalie, before you go, could I speak with you for a moment? She looked up, surprised. Of course. He gestured her into his office, suddenly uncertain. She sat in one of the chairs across from his desk, her posture perfect, her expression professionally neutral. How many times had they sat like this? Hundreds? Thousands? And he'd never noticed the small scar above her left eyebrow, or the way she twisted her watch when she was thinking. I wanted to. He stopped, realizing he had no idea what he wanted. To thank her? For what? Doing the job he paid her to do? To ask about her lunch? That would be inappropriate and strange. I wanted to make sure you're happy here, at Meridian Tech. Natalie's eyes widened slightly. In 5 years, he'd never asked her anything remotely personal. Yes, the work is challenging and the company is doing well. But are you happy? The question hung between them. Natalie considered lying, giving him the easy answer he probably wanted. But Marcus's words echoed in her mind. You're wasted as an assistant. I'm content, she said carefully, but I think I might be capable of more than what I'm currently doing. Julian felt something shift, like tectonic plates moving beneath his feet. More? I've been thinking about pursuing a strategy role, or client relations. I've been handling a lot of that work unofficially anyway. You want to leave? The words came out flat, a statement rather than a question. Not leave, grow. There's a difference. Julian looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. She was beautiful, he realized with a jolt. Not in the obvious way that turned heads, but in a quiet, steady way that snuck up on you. How had he missed that? I'll think about it, he said. Though what he was really thinking was that he couldn't imagine his days without her there, outside his office, fixing everything he broke. Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Julian, he said suddenly. You can call me Julian, Natalie blinked. All right. After she left, Julian sat in the growing darkness, his empire of glass and steel and success feeling suddenly hollow. He'd built everything he'd set out to build. He'd proven everyone who doubted him wrong. He'd achieved more by 36 than most people dreamed of in a lifetime, but he'd done it by putting blinders on, by refusing to see anything that didn't directly contribute to his goals. And now someone else was showing Natalie the attention she deserved. And Julian was left wondering what it said about him that it had taken another man's interest to make him notice what had been in front of him all along. The week progressed, and Marcus's presence in the office became as regular as morning coffee. He found reasons to consult with Natalie, to seek her advice, to simply talk to her like she was a person worth knowing. And with each interaction, Natalie felt herself unfurling like a flower that had been too long in shadow. On Thursday, Marcus invited her to drinks after work with some of the marketing team. On Friday, he brought her lunch again. This time, sushi from the place she'd mentioned was her favorite. By the following Monday, their friendship had developed the easy rhythm of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Julian watched it all with growing agitation. His work suffered. He missed details in contracts, forgot to return important calls, and snapped at his board members during their weekly meeting. His assistant, who had once been invisible, now occupied his thoughts with obsessive frequency. The breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon. Julian emerged from his office to find Marcus leaning against Natalie's desk, both of them laughing at something on her computer screen. Marcus's hand rested on the back of her chair, casual and proprietary, and Natalie looked up at him with an openness that made Julian's blood run cold. "Natalie," he barked, "the Riverside contracts, now!" She turned, the smile fading from her face. "They're not due until Friday. I want them now." Marcus straightened, his expression cooling. "Julian, I was actually hoping to borrow Natalie for an hour. I need her insight on the Peterson pitch. She works for me, not you." The words came out harsher than Julian intended, echoing in the suddenly quiet office. Several heads turned from nearby desks. Natalie's face flushed, but whether from embarrassment or anger, Julian couldn't tell. "I'm aware of the organizational chart," Marcus said mildly. "I was asking, not demanding. Natalie, we can do this another time." "No," Natalie said, standing. Her voice was steady, but her eyes flashed with something Julian had never seen before: defiance. "I'll help you with the Peterson pitch. Mr. Pierce can wait for contracts that aren't due for 2 more days." She walked away with Marcus, leaving Julian standing there, aware that he'd just revealed something he'd been trying desperately to hide, even from himself. He was jealous, and worse, he was losing something he'd never known he had. The air in Meridian Tech had changed, charged with a tension that everyone felt but nobody discussed. Julian Pierce, normally the picture of controlled efficiency, had become unpredictable. He second-guessed decisions, micromanaged his executives, and found endless reasons to interrupt whatever Natalie was doing, especially if Marcus was nearby. Natalie, for her part, was transforming. The quiet, invisible assistant was being replaced by someone more confident, more radiant. She dressed differently now, wearing colors instead of her usual neutrals. She spoke up in meetings, offering insights that made people pause and nod. She smiled more, laughed more, lived more, and Marcus Hartley was the catalyst for it all. 3 weeks after the incident with the contracts, Marcus appeared at Natalie's desk as she was packing up for the day. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and there was something nervous in his usual confident demeanor. "Natalie, do you have dinner plans tonight?" She looked up, her heart rate quickening. They'd had lunch together dozens of times now, had coffee in the mornings, had become genuine friends, but dinner felt different. Dinner felt like a line being crossed. "No plans," she said softly. "Would you like to have dinner with me? Not a work thing, just us." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Natalie was aware of Julian's door opening behind her, aware of his presence even without turning around. For 5 years, she'd been attuned to his every movement, his every need. But for the first time, she didn't care if he was listening. "I'd like that very much." Marcus's smile could have lit the entire office. "I'll pick you up at 7? "Perfect." After he left, Natalie felt Julian's presence like a weight. She turned to find him standing in his doorway, his face carved from stone. "That's unprofessional," he said. "Dating a colleague from a different department isn't against company policy." "I checked." "You checked?" The words were sharp with accusation. "Yes, I checked." Natalie met his eyes without flinching. "Was there something work-related you needed, Mr. Pierce?" The formal address was deliberate, a wall thrown up between them. Julian flinched as if she'd struck him. "No, nothing." He retreated to his office and closed the door. And Natalie released a breath that felt like it had been trapped in her chest for years. That evening, Marcus took her to a small Italian restaurant in the North End, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles, where the owner greeted regular customers by name. It was warm and intimate, and everything Natalie hadn't known she'd been craving. "You look beautiful," Marcus said as they settled into their booth. "Though you always do." Natalie felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You don't have to say things like that." "I'm not saying it because I have to." I'm saying it because it's true, and because I don't think anyone tells you often enough. He reached across the table and took her hand. Natalie, I want to be honest with you about something. I'm interested in you, not as a colleague, not as a friend, though I value both those things, but as someone I'd like to get to know on a deeper level, someone I'd like to date properly. Her breath caught. Marcus, you don't have to answer right now. But I wanted you to know where I stand. You're brilliant and kind, and you deserve someone who sees all of that, who values it. Natalie looked at their joined hands, at this man who had shown her more respect and attention in a month than she'd received in 5 years of devoted service. I'd like that too, she said quietly. To date you properly. His smile was brilliant. Yeah? Yeah. They talked through dinner, through dessert, through coffee afterward. Marcus told her about growing up in Boston, about his close-knit family, about the career path that had taken him through 3 companies before landing at Meridian Tech. Natalie found herself sharing things she rarely told anyone. Her complicated relationship with her parents, her love of painting that she'd set aside for more practical pursuits, her dreams of traveling to places she'd only seen in books. When he walked her to her car, Marcus hesitated, then cupped her face gently and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and when Natalie drove home, she felt like she was floating. She didn't see Julian's car in the parking garage, didn't know that he'd stayed late again, staring at spreadsheets that refused to make sense because all he could think about was Natalie having dinner with someone else, laughing with someone else, falling for someone else. The next morning, Natalie arrived at work with a glow that everyone noticed. Julian noticed too, and the sight of her happiness made his chest ache in ways he didn't have words for. Good morning, she said as she passed his office, and there was a warmth in her voice that had never been there before, at least not for him. Morning, he managed. The day proceeded with excruciating normalcy. Meetings happened, emails were sent, deals were negotiated. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Marcus stopped by Natalie's desk throughout the day, and each interaction held a new intimacy. A hand on her shoulder, a private joke, a look that excluded everyone else. Julian's productivity plummeted. He canceled a conference call, citing a schedule conflict that didn't exist. He delegated a presentation he'd been working on for weeks. His board members started leaving concerned messages that he didn't return. The crisis came on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after that first dinner date. Julian arrived at the office to find Natalie and Marcus in the conference room, arriving early for a meeting and clearly in the middle of a private moment. Through the glass walls, he watched Marcus tuck a strand of hair behind Natalie's ear, watched her smile up at him with undisguised affection, watched them kiss briefly before breaking apart as other employees approached. Something in Julian snapped. He stormed to his office and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone and called his head of HR. I need to discuss Marcus Hartley's employment contract, specifically the non-compete clauses and termination conditions. But even as he spoke, even as he considered the nuclear option of finding a reason to fire Marcus, Julian knew he was being irrational. Marcus hadn't done anything wrong. He'd simply seen what Julian had been too blind to notice, and he'd had the courage to act on it. The real problem was that Julian had wasted 5 years treating someone extraordinary like she was ordinary. And now, someone else was reaping the rewards of her brilliance, while Julian was left with the bitter taste of regret. He hung up without following through on his threat. Firing Marcus wouldn't solve anything. It would only prove that Julian was exactly the kind of man who abused his power when he didn't get what he wanted. That afternoon, a major crisis erupted with their largest client. Harrison Industries was threatening to pull their contract, worth $30 million annually, over a perceived slight during a negotiation. The email chain was a disaster, with accusations flying and relationships crumbling. Julian called an emergency meeting with his executive team, but 20 minutes into the discussion, they were no closer to a solution. The client's CEO, Patricia Harrison, was notoriously difficult, and no one could figure out how to salvage the relationship. We're dead in the water, said the VP of Client Relations, throwing his hands up. Patricia's made up her mind. There has to be something, Julian said, hearing the desperation in his own voice. This contract represented a significant portion of their annual revenue. Losing it would tank their quarterly projections and send their stock price plummeting. Actually, Natalie's voice came from the corner where she'd been taking notes. There might be. Everyone turned to look at her. She swallowed hard but continued. Patricia Harrison's daughter, Jennifer, interned here 3 summers ago. I supervised her for a week when her assigned supervisor was out sick. We stayed in touch. She's getting married next month. Julian stared at her. And I was invited to the wedding. Patricia will be there. If I could have a private conversation with her? Explain that the slight was unintentional and show her that we value the relationship beyond just the contract. Natalie trailed off, suddenly uncertain under everyone's gaze. Marcus leaned forward. That's brilliant. Patricia might listen to you in a way she won't listen to executives she sees as trying to save their own skins. The VP of Client Relations nodded slowly. It could work. It's unconventional, but we're out of conventional options. Julian looked at Natalie, really looked at her, seeing her the way Marcus saw her, as someone capable of far more than organizing his calendar. Can you do this? I think so. But I'd need authorization to make certain commitments on behalf of the company. Whatever you need, Julian said. This is your project now. Over the next week, Natalie worked quietly on the Harrison situation. She attended the wedding, had a lengthy conversation with Patricia, and followed up with a thoughtfully crafted proposal that addressed the client's concerns while protecting Meridian Tech's interests. On Friday afternoon, the email arrived. Harrison Industries would continue their contract with an expansion into new service areas that would increase the deal's value to $40 million annually. The executive floor erupted in celebration. The VP of Client Relations personally thanked Natalie, and even the CFO stopped by her desk to shake her hand. But it was Julian who appeared in her doorway as the sun set over the city, his expression complex. That was exceptional work, he said quietly. You saved us. I just leveraged a relationship, Natalie said, though she couldn't help feeling proud. No, you saw an angle that none of us saw. You built relationships that mattered. You solved what everyone else said was unsolvable. He paused. Marcus was right. You're wasted as an assistant. Natalie looked up at him, surprised. I'm creating a new position, Julian continued. Director of Strategic Client Relations. It's yours if you want it. 20% raise, your own office, a seat at the executive table. It was everything she'd wanted. Everything she'd been working toward. But the timing felt off, complicated by the way Julian was looking at her, like he was offering more than just a job. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. He turned to leave, then stopped. Natalie, I'm sorry. For what? For not seeing you sooner. For taking you for granted. For... He struggled with words that didn't come easily. For being blind when I should have been paying attention. Before she could respond, Marcus appeared, his face flushed with excitement. Natalie, we're all going out to celebrate. You're coming, right? She looked between the two men. Marcus, who had shown her kindness from day one, and Julian, who was finally seeing her but might be too late. I'll be right there, she told Marcus. As Marcus headed back to the group gathering by the elevators, Julian met her eyes one more time. In his gaze, she saw regret, longing, and something that looked dangerously like the beginning of love. Think about the job offer, he said softly. And Natalie, whoever you're spending time with these days is a very lucky person. He walked back to his office, and Natalie stood frozen, her heart pulling in 2 directions. Toward the man who had awakened her to her own worth, and toward the man who was finally seeing what had been there all along. The choice, she realized, wasn't going to be easy, and it was only about to get more complicated.